My mother was terrified of dying. So naturally. After years of making my life miserable, I decided to make sure she started receiving information about cemetery plots. Petty. Absolutely. But after everything she had done, I honestly wasn't sure whether I was finally getting revenge or simply becoming as bitter as she always accused me of being. If you've ever had someone cross every boundary imaginable and then act like you were the problem, hit that subscribe button. Like this video and stay until the end, because this story isn't about one prank. It's about what happens when someone spends years trying to control you and finally loses access to you. I should probably start at the beginning. My mother is a narcissist. She cheated on my father, and when they divorced, I was only 10 years old. My mother got custody, and shortly afterward, we moved far away from my father. I was a child. I didn't understand divorce. I didn't understand why my father was suddenly so far away. I just knew that my family had been ripped apart, and I was expected to adopt. But distance from my father wasn't the only thing I had to deal with. My mother was also an alcoholic, and there was a pattern that became impossible to ignore as I grew older. Alcohol came first, her children came second. Sometimes much further down the list. As a kid, you don't necessarily have the words for emotional neglect. You don't sit there thinking, my parent is consistently prioritizing a substance over my emotional needs. You just feel it. You notice the empty bottles. You notice the mood changes. You learn which version of your parent is walking through the door by the sound of their footsteps, and you learn to keep your expectations low. Eventually, I grew up. I got married. Then my husband and I had our first child. For a while, I thought becoming a mother myself might somehow change my relationship with my mother. Maybe she'd finally understand me. Maybe she'd see me as an adult. Maybe she'd be proud. Instead, she seemed to see motherhood as a competition. My husband and I ended up living with her after our first child was born. At first, I tried to convince myself it could work. We were family. We could help each other. Maybe living together would actually bring us closer. I was wrong. My mother constantly overstepped boundaries if I made a parenting decision. She had an opinion. If I did something differently, then she would have done it. She had to explain why her way was better, and the more confident I became as a mother, the more she seemed determined to undermine me. She would point out little things. Then bigger things. Eventually, it became obvious that she wasn't simply offering advice. She was trying to establish herself as the superior mother. One comment in particular stayed with me. She told my husband that she wished I had it harder. Think about that for a second. She wasn't saying she hoped I learned something from a difficult experience. She wasn't saying she wished parenting had been easier for her. She literally said she wished I had it harder because she had suffered so much as a young mother. It was like my struggles were supposed to validate hers. If I suffered, then her suffering had meaning. If I had an easier life than she did, perhaps she couldn't stand it. But things eventually went from emotionally exhausting to genuinely dangerous. I was 5 months pregnant with my second child when my mother pushed me. 5 months pregnant. That moment changed something inside me. There are arguments you can recover from. There are cruel comments you can eventually forget. But when someone puts their hands on you while you're carrying your unborn child, something fundamental shifts. I remember the shock more than anything, that split second when your brain almost refuses to process what's happening, then the fear, then the anger, not just for myself, for my baby. And suddenly, all those years of boundary violations didn't seem like isolated incidents anymore. They were part of a pattern. My mother wasn't going to respect my boundaries because she'd never accepted that I was entitled to have them, and then she made things even worse. She tried to evict us. At the same time, she was trying to increase our bills so that leaving would become harder. It felt like she wanted control from every direction if we stayed. She could control us, if we tried to leave. She could make leaving financially painful. For years, I have felt trapped in the role she'd created for me, the difficult daughter, the ungrateful daughter. The daughter who supposedly didn't appreciate everything she'd done, but now I had a husband. I had children, and suddenly protecting my own family mattered more than winning my mother's approval, So we got out, It wasn't easy, but eventually we managed to leave. And then came the part my mother probably never expected, no contact. For more than a year, no. Arguments, no explaining myself, no defending my parenting, no responding to another guilt trip, no trying to convince her that I was worthy of basic respect. Silence, and honestly, the silence was incredible, At first, I expected guilt. Instead, I felt relief. I could wake up without wondering what kind of conflict was waiting for me. I could make decisions about my children without anticipating criticism. I could breathe. But here's the strange thing about escaping someone who has controlled you for years. Even after they're gone, part of you still wants them to know they lost. You want them to understand that you survived. You want them to regret what they did. You want some cosmic judge to knock on their door and say, you were wrong. Unfortunately, life doesn't always provide that kind of satisfying ending, So I started creating my own version. I signed my mother up for information from Scientology, then Jehovah's Witnesses. Then I requested information about junking cars. I had retirement home information sent to her, Then I took it one step further. I requested information about a cemetery plot on her behalf, and that one felt especially satisfying because my mother is terrified of dying. There was something almost absurd about imagining her opening her mail and finding information about retirement communities, cemetery arrangements, and all sorts of things she never asked for. Was it mature? Absolutely not. Was it satisfying? Unfortunately, yes. But the latest one was my favorite. I got her an anonymous STD message. I was particularly amused by that because her boyfriend frequently plays games on her phone like a toddler. Imagine the scene. Her phone buzzes. She picks it up, She sees an alarming, anonymous message. She immediately starts wondering who sent it. Then she looks at her boyfriend. He looks at her, Now he's wondering what's going on. And suddenly, a completely ordinary evening has turned into an interrogation. I didn't have to be there. I didn't have to argue. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't even have to reveal myself. All I had to do was sit somewhere far away and imagine the confusion. And that was the strange appeal of it. For years, my mother had made me feel powerless. She had controlled where I lived. She interfered with how I PARENTE. She criticized me. She crossed physical boundaries. She tried to make leaving difficult, but now she couldn't reach me. I had taken away the one thing she always seemed to need from me, access. And that may actually be the most important part of this entire story. The petty revenge wasn't really about Scientology. It wasn't about cemetery plots. It wasn't even about the anonymous message. It was about finally realizing that I didn't need her permission to walk away. For years, I thought justice meant making her understand what she'd done. I thought I needed an apology. I thought I needed her to admit she had hurt me. But after going no contact, I learned something much more powerful. Sometimes closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. Sometimes closure is simply realizing they don't get to hurt you anymore. And yes, I still had some bitterness. I'm not going to pretend I magically became the bigger person overnight. When you've spent years being mistreated, anger doesn't disappear just because you finally leave. But I also started noticing something. Every time I focused on irritating my mother, I was still giving her space in my head. And that's where the line between revenge and freedom gets complicated. Maybe the funniest revenge isn't sending another Annoying piece of information. Maybe it's building a life she has absolutely no control over. Maybe it's raising your children differently. Maybe it's having a peaceful home. Maybe it's waking up one morning and realizing you haven't thought about her for an entire day, because the ultimate revenge against someone who thrives on controlling you is becoming impossible to control. My mother wanted me to believe that I needed her. Instead, I learned how to live without her, and that was the part she could never take away. So, do I pass the petty test? Maybe. Am I bitter? Probably a little, but after everything that happened, I think the real victory wasn't making my mother angry. It was getting my life back, because sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's simply refusing to let them destroy yours. And if you've ever dealt with a toxic parent, a narcissist, or someone who made you feel like you were constantly walking on eggshells, remember this: you don't always get justice from them. Sometimes you have to create your own peace, and honestly, peace can be a lot more satisfying than revenge. If this story made you think of someone in your own life, hit like, subscribe for more Reddit revenge stories, and tell me in the comments, what's the pettiest revenge you've ever seen someone pull? Because sometimes the smallest act of revenge comes after years of being pushed too far.